Hey Eve, welcome to Brown Girls Read. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here. I love your podcast. And, I gotten to hear you speak about one of my favorite books, Samya Dave. Is that how you
Oh,
pronounce her last name?
yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. And we loved reading your book, Fair Play. We loved getting to know the Fair Play system. I have actually already started implementing it with my husband a little bit. I'm easing him into it. And I think one of the things that we loved about the book is all the research that went into it that you did for creating the system. So today we want to discuss Fair Play, your journey, and your favorite reads with you.
So excited.
Sorry. Before we begin, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you started on the journey of creating this fair play system?
I didn't set out to be any sort of expert on what I now know is called the gender division of labor, which is a global issue. And we'll talk about sort of the political movement that fair play has become. But it started really as a personal movement to save my own marriage. And I write about that in Fair Play about, as my mother said, she's a professor of social change. She says, you have to go for real change, whether it's societal change or personal change, you have to go from pre-consciousness to consciousness to then a fight for solutions. And so for about 35 years of my life, I was in pre-consciousness. I had no idea that women held 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a home and family. This is, like I said, a global issue. This is not just the US. And in my life, it manifests, as you saw, I wrote about, right? It manifests in a breakdown for me on the side of the road when my husband Seth sent me a text that just said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And you can picture the scene because I don't get to really break down the scene in the book, which is hopefully some of your listeners can relate. I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. That text came in as I just had my second son, Ben. So I had a newborn at home. I was in the car racing to pick up my older son, who was a toddler at the time. I had a client contract in my lap because I had been forced out of the traditional workforce. I never say opted out anymore or dropped out. I say forced out. I was trying to mark up the contract as I had started my own firm. There was a breast pump and a diaper bag on the passenger seat of my car. There were gifts for a newborn baby to return in the back seat of my car. Every time I would hit the brakes because I was racing to pick up Zach because I'm always late because I have a million things to do, a pen would sort of stab me in the vagina because I was marking up this contract with a pen, an actual pen. So that was the metaphor for that day. I would hit the stop sign or the brakes and I would just be stabbed in the vagina with a pen. And that's what happened to me that day. And so for me to pull over, I'm from New York City, but I live in Los Angeles now. And so we take traffic very seriously. So for me to pull over and be late to pick up my toddler, things had to be really bad. And I think that was
Yeah.
the first day crying on the side of the road, thinking to myself, A, I'm the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs. B, this is not the career marriage combo I thought I was going to have. And C, how would I become, the default? I call in Fair Play the she fault for literally every single household and domestic task for my family. It wasn't supposed to happen to me. Kati Demand, this was not supposed to happen to me. This was I have the privilege of being the daughter of a single mother. So I had thought a lot about what the relationship I wanted to have look like. And on top of that, I'm a Harvard trained mediator. I'm literally trained to use my voice. So I think that was the day where I realized maybe this is more than just my problem. And I started a real a quest, like, Puff the Magic Dragon or any of our children's books we read our kids, like a quest to find out what was happening to me. And especially so it didn't happen to your generation. So it didn't happen to the women younger than me, whether it was 1 year younger or a decade younger. I didn't want anybody else to have to go through sort of that type of pain and realization that the world felt so unfair, even with all of my privilege. It felt so horrifically unfair. And that's why I wrote Fair Play.
Yeah, that is what is so inspiring about it, that you noticed a problem in your life and you wanted to solve it, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you. Because I think a lot of us, first of all, a lot of us don't even have that awareness, right? That something that shouldn't be happening to me is happening to me. And then a lot of us don't have the courage to take the next step forward. Like, what can I do about it? Right. That is what I think I found the most inspiring in this book.
And I'm
That
just so happy that you wrote it because a lot
Thank you.
of people need it even when they don't realize they need it. So much of what you wrote, I might not be relating to every single thing in the book because of being in different stage of life, but so much of that resonated still because I have heard these things in conversations with friends who are in those stages of life, who are complaining, who are trying to figure out why they feel this way, why they are like so bogged down by this weight. And they also feel guilty for feeling this way because, as a mom, they're supposed to be a good mom and not feel this way. All this projection we have heard in our lives, like moms are put on this pedestal for being sacrificial,
Yeah.
almost like
Yes.
they're not human. So I think that is a very damaging thing. So I'm really glad this book is out there, and whenever I meet a friend or talk to them now, I'm like, oh, you should read that book. I just remember I had a conversation with a friend yesterday where she was complaining about how her family, they are going to see snow in Yosemite for their young son who has never seen snow in life. And then she was like, I was the one who did everything, and this guy is just like going along. And I'm like, you know what, here's a book for you. Read
Yes.
it.
Thank you. Thank you. But you think about all the stuff, right? You have to think, you have to conceive, oh, I really want my child to see snow, right? I call that informal education. That's one of the cards of the fair play system because it's a metaphor where you have 100 cards and you really look at those cards, not as a scorekeeping exercise, but to say, what do we value together as a couple, but also how can we make this fair? Doesn't have to be 50-50. I think we should burn that expression. But the fairness comes from the ownership because when you realize that you have to own, say, we're talking about informal education, whether it's you want to teach your child to ride a bike or you want to take them to see the snow, you first have to know what you may want your child to see or do. That's what I call conception. And then you have to plan it, right? This is one trip. And then you multiply that by thousands, millions of it's on you
right.
to get through every single day when you're a woman.
Yeah.
And then you start to realize that when we talk about the workplace, when we talk about politics, why women aren't there. You look at the labor force participation rates in India, you look at them in Japan, now in America, right? We're back to the 1980s. It is fundamentally because, to me, the last frontier of feminism is ironically in the place closest to us, our homes. And I think that we need cultural warriors of all stages of life to say this is not on us. But that's the problem. The home presents so small, as you were saying earlier, because people think they're fighting over blueberries, right? I thought my marriage was ending over blueberries. I had a man in White Plains, New York, tell me he got a divorce over a glue stick.
Wow.
And that's the
Oh my
problem.
God.
So we think we're having these small fights in our own house over the who bought the jacket for Yosemite. But what I'm here to tell everybody is that, the personal is political, private lives are public issues. And none of these things that you're fighting over is your fault. There's no guilt that you should be feeling about it. And more importantly, this is a political issue for how we value mothers and for how we treat women. And so that's why ultimately I really appreciate you coming on this journey with me because I can't do this alone, right? This requires all of us to say, oh, you're feeling that way? Okay, great. This is not about you and your husband. This is actually a political issue. Read Fair Play, but also here's a million other things. I can be in your circle. I'll support you. You deserve fairness in your home.
Absolutely. I totally agree with everything you have said. And the way you started doing this with that shit I do list with your
Yes.
friends and started crowdsourcing all the shit that women do, I found it just amazing. It was also empowering to read because you start saying, oh, yes, I also do this thing and never considered this as work. And,
Yeah.
slowly you start valuing the little things that you do in your own life. I was really curious, like, what are some of the most outrageous or like craziest things you have seen on that list?
Oh, it's such a great question. So, just for your to give the context to your readers, after that Blueberries Day, one of the things I did was I went on a breast cancer march, and I write about this because this is what was the origin of the shit I do spreadsheet. It was having 9 women with me on this beautiful Saturday where we were honoring our friend and having this great morning until I say like we became the reverse Cinderella, right? We all sort of turned into pumpkins at noon because all of a sudden we're not even talking to each other. Our phones are blowing up with, texts like, when are you coming home from the parade? Or like my friend's partner who said, where's Hudson's soccer bag? My other friend's partner, what's the address of the birthday party? You didn't leave me a gift. My favorite was my friend, talk about outrageous. My friend Kate's husband that day texted her when we were all marching, for breast cancer. Do the kids need to eat lunch? Um, so I think for me the real outrage, and then we'll talk about what I actually found individually in the should I do spreadsheet. But the real outrage was watching all those powerful women. They were powerful women engaged in the workforce, using their voice everywhere else. Executives, leaders, all look at me. All 9 of them say to me, "Oh my God, Eve, I left my partner with too much to do." The outrage. I finally had my first act of resistance. I wouldn't let them leave until we counted up how many phone calls and texts we had received. And that was 30 phone calls, 46 texts for 10 women over 30
That's
minutes.
crazy. Oh my
Wow.
God.
So that number stuck in my head because I wrote that down. I had lots of moleskins and notes that I was just taking notes, and I didn't even know at that point this was going to become a book. I was just curious. And so my outrage from that day led to the outrage of calling those women, and then women like you guys who I didn't even know, because they were getting this Excel spreadsheet from their friends. And over 9 months, I crowdsourced 2,000 items of invisible work. 98 tabs in a spreadsheet, as you know, called the should I do spreadsheet, things like pediatrician. But then the outrageous things I didn't even know, right, were like Girl Scout cookies ordering in sales. I
Yeah.
didn't have a girl at that point who was old enough to do that. So I was like, oh my God, that's 5 hours. Or sunscreen. Yes, it's 2 minutes to apply, but what about the 30 minutes for the chase? And I
Right.
would write that down. Or another outrageous one was, do you know how many women, and this was a problem globally. I saw this in Japan, mainland China, India, the UK, Australia, and the US and Canada, who still purchase their husbands' clothes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
I've
that
seen
was
it in
actually,
my friends as well. Like she was like, "Oh, I buy his clothes. I know his size. I know what to do. I do it better." Like I've heard all these things, and this is like 3 or 4 years ago. So at that point, I thought it was normal. But when I was reading Fair Play, I was like, "Oh, everything's coming
no,
back. All the interactions are coming back."
no, it is not normal to buy clothes for your husband. It is not normal for them to say to you, I wear no underwear because they have holes in them and you didn't buy me more underwear. It's not normal for your spouse like mine to say, well, I can't have a blueberry smoothie because you forgot to buy me my blueberries, right? This is not normal. It is what happens, right? It is predictable. But like
Right.
I like to say, it's not inevitable because at the end of the day, this is fucking inevitable. Is that the real problem is men. So I had to write to people married to men because that is where that's what we're living in today. Aspirationally, I want us to center the changing family and single mothers. We'll talk about that. But I had to talk to women married to men because that's really where our problem is inclusive. But I also want to center the problem, which is that men are asking women to purchase their underwear, and that's a huge problem in our in 21st century. It's nothing has changed on the housework front. A little bit has changed with fatherhood. We'll talk about that, but that was the shocking thing to me was how little was changing in terms of who was doing the housework, which is a lot of the fair play cards.
Right. And I think whatever you're saying, there isn't enough awareness about it in women as well, right? Because Daman and I were talking about it earlier, and we were like, we love this book so much. We wanted to gift it to our friends who are going to have kids. And I did that. One of my best friends is going to have a child in like 2 months. And I gifted her this book, and she got offended. She said that she doesn't have time to read it. She said that she's not looking to manage her time right now. She's fine with it. Her only responsibility is to get the kid out of her right now. And I was like, I was trying to, explain to her that this is not about time management. It's about fairly dividing the tasks between you and your husband. And it doesn't matter if you have a child or not, right? You can still use it. I wanted to
So
talk to you about.
hard. Yes, can we please dive into that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
it's why I consider a fair play almost like a political campaign,
Mhm.
right? Where sometimes I'm really spending 4 hours with one woman or man, and sometimes I'm on big stages, right? And oftentimes I try to make as much time as I can for your generation, right? For people who are younger than me, because I think I need you as cultural warriors, as I said to you earlier. Not that everybody's always going to listen, right? And not that, and sometimes people have to come back to you and say, and you will say, like, I told you so, and not in a sad way, but in a, I'm here for you way. Whenever you're ready to receive these messages, we are here for women, right? So, in unicorn space, and we'll talk about that as a concept in the book around the fact that we as women do not believe we deserve a permission to be unavailable. And so we can talk a little bit about the core finding of fair play. But I think what I want to say to you is that not everyone is ready to receive these messages. This is still very provocative. It's still very new. And that's why, like I said, it feels like I need everybody, right? This is a political movement to say that no longer is it okay to value women's labor as nothing, as zero. It's no longer okay for us to value women's time as sand. I say that we treat women's time as if infinite, like sand, and men's time we guard it as if it's finite, right? Like diamonds. And that was the core finding of fair play. And I think I wanted to say one thing about what women said to me, why I chose to write to women, because it was actually, we know men don't value women's time because we see that if women enter a male profession, the salaries automatically go down. Society doesn't value our
Yeah.
time. But I think it was talking like you were to your friend, Kati. It was about like thinking how women devalue our own time because we've been conditioned to do that. And so this idea of, oh my God, my time is diamonds and I need to manage it and I have time choice or however I use it, we're not used to hearing that. And so
Yeah.
women were saying things to me like, well, my job is more flexible, or
Mhm.
um, my husband makes more money than me. He's the breadwinner. Of course, I should be doing the domestic labor. Or they said to me, I'm a better multitasker. I'm wired differently for care. Or they said to me, in the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I should just do it myself. I
Yeah.
find the time.
Oh, that's you, Kathy.
Yeah, I always keep telling my husband that I'm good at multitasking and he's not. And then I end up doing so much of my work in my day, like so much of the housework that I shouldn't be doing. And I realized it after I read your book.
Thank you. Thank you. But that was the number one thing. I mean, that was mine, right? It was before COVID, obviously, earlier on in my research when I still held on to these, what I call toxic time messages, that I am to have it in all means to do it all. It never even occurred to me that I would ask my husband to take our kids to school and start his workday later so I could start my workday earlier. It never even occurred to me. I mean, I look back now and I'm shocked who I was. I really am shocked. Conditioning. But it was when this neuroscientist, when I sat in his office with my, I'm a good student with my, again, back to the pen in my vagina. I always have a pen and my moleskin out. And I'm talking to him about women and men and multitasking and saying, all these job coaches, I see them saying, women's superpowers are multitaskers and we're better than men at this. And first of all, he just looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, there's no gendered brain difference in how we executive function or multitask. So that was
Yeah.
shut down, right? There is nothing. But then he said something that literally changed my life. He said to me, "You're writing a book about this. You're using my quote to tell women that they're not better multitaskers." And I said, "Yes. Aren't you excited to be part of my movement?" And he said, "Well, yeah, but then, um, you know, we men have sort of convinced you women that you're better at wiping asses and doing dishes.
Oh my God.
And
That
how great
sucks.
for
See,
my
I told
career."
you, Kathy. Like, we have been convinced for convenience of men.
Well, that's what he said. He said, "Why are you, I'm not sure I want to be part of this." He was kidding, obviously, but he was like,
Uh-huh.
it's been helpful to my tenure and my career. And my wife doesn't have a problem with it because she thinks she's better at it and takes
Oh my
pride in it.
God.
And I get to golf and write more papers. Like, I'm good. Like, why are you going to blow up this notion? And I cried. It makes me tear up because it was like the armor that had been protecting me was shattered. And so that was the time in my life where I said I could either resign myself to doing it all, literally lose my identity in my marriage, or leave like my mother, had to. She was left to do it all. Eat, pray, love it out of here, but that's also hard when you have kids. That takes So is there another solution? And for me, it meant starting to treat my home like my most important organization, because that was my day job. I'm an organizational management specialist and lawyer. I work for families that look like the HBO show Succession. And so I started to ask that question. What would it look like if we treated our homes as our most important organizations? And then I knew it wouldn't look like the way it does today, where women are dying in decision fatigue or resentful and angry already. I knew it wouldn't look like that. And so
Yeah.
that's ultimately what the system of fair play became. It became an answer to that question. If we treat our homes as our most important organization with the respect and rigor it deserves, then we will enter it with systems and respect like we do in the workplace.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the beauty of it. I think it's so obvious, like, the way you're spending your time or your tasks at work, just sort of like mirror them in your home, like take it end to end, right? You're assigned a task, you take it end to end. That was the best thing I loved about Fair Play, I think.
Well, thank you. I want to just say that for me, it was asking this question, and I talk about it so funny, but again, it was a global question that was so easy to answer. When I was able to speak to people, I think now in 17 countries, it was, how did mustard get in your refrigerator, or whatever condiment it was?
Yeah. Hmm.
Because it was so easy to see that there was a conception phase, as I talked about before with
Right.
Yosemite, right? Katya, it would be someone like you saying, "Oh, my second son Johnny likes, French's yellow mustard with his protein. Otherwise, he won't eat protein. He'll choke." And I would
Hmm.
say, "Oh, I know that phase. That's conception. We know that from organizational management." And then you'd say to me, "And then I monitor that mustard for when it's running low." And I get stakeholder buy-in of my family to see what else they need on the grocery list.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say, "Oh, I know that phase. That's planning." And then my husband goes to the store to go purchase the yellow mustard, and the dude brings home spicy Dijon every fucking time. And Eve, I'm sorry, I don't believe this whole own a task, because I can't even get my husband to bring home the right type of mustard. You want him to own our living will? And I
Yeah.
say, yes, I do. I do. Relationships that when you can apply an ownership mindset to the home, and I could at least give you the tools to start to have those conversations, not for 50-50, but to start with even one card, quote unquote task, right? From us, for Seth and me, it was extracurricular sports. Our kids have been playing since they were like two, our two sons. And Seth would tell everybody he was in charge of extracurricular sports, of soccer and little league. And he just went to the field, guys. He just went to the field. Ownership mindset.
Hmm.
And so Seth started with that one task, and he said, "I had no idea that there were 85 tasks in the conception and planning stage just to get to the little league field." And that
Right.
was when my life started changing. It was I was still holding about 85 cards, and Seth was holding one, but it was the first time in my life where he was understanding. He was in it with me to understand that it was much more than it appeared to be.
Right.
And that's how you start change. The
Hmm.
And
small,
I do
small things.
believe that men know ownership because they do this day in, day out at their work. They take pride in it. They want all the accolades and promotions and rewards of it. So they do it there. I think the problem is when it's unpaid labor, and also the whole cultural conditioning where they have never had to do this. Nobody ever told them that, this whole task is yours. You cannot just help us. Like I love that you wrote about the helping part. That quote is my favorite. But like, yeah, don't help me, take one thing and do it, and like take it off my head. That's how you actually help me.
Babysitting, helping. There's all these weird words, right? Because, and then of course the accolades that men get when they, there's a really funny Taylor Swift song, "If I Were a Man." I hadn't seen the video. Someone sent it to me recently, and it's such a funny video of this guy, Taylor Swift, dresses up as a man in the video, and she goes to the park with her child as a man, and all the other women in the park are clapping and cheering for this guy,
That's so
holding his
true.
kid and kissing
Oh
him.
my God.
He's not changing the diapers. He's not feeding the child the snacks. He's just holding his child. And
And that's so real. I have seen it in my own
That is
friends.
so
Yeah,
real.
so
Yeah.
real. Like men do the bare minimum. The families and friends, they're all like,
Yeah.
"Oh, you have a great husband. He at least picks the kid." And I'm like, "Oh, this is what we are striving for." Like that, he
well,
does the
that's it.
bare.
But then that's the guilt you were talking about, Damon, earlier, right? That not only on top of it, you're saying, oh my God, but he is better than the generation before. And then you watch women shame you of the generation before saying, and so my
Yeah.
friend was saying to me, the problem with the generation above us was that men saw their mothers working, but they also
Mhm.
saw them doing everything in the home,
Yes.
taking pride
Right.
over it, and guarding their husband's time.
Hmm.
So we actually were done a real disservice with the generation above us.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so
we
that's
were.
why we have to start from scratch. So I'm here to say, like, let's level the playing field. Let's all say, you know what? This is not man bashing. I love men. Fair play became a love letter to men because so many men said to me, I would do more in my home, but I don't know my role.
Hmm.
I call that psychological safety when I talk to workplaces about that. If you go into your workplace and you don't know your role, it feels terrible. So many men said to me that that is how they feel in the home. I never want anybody to feel that way in the home. But it starts
Right.
with obviously us being able to have a new language, communicate, and ultimately say, this is not on us. We deserve true partners if we have the privilege to have them. And if you are a single mother, you deserve a society that values you, and we're here to fight for you.
Yes. And the friend I suggested a book to yesterday, they are a great couple in terms of fairness from how I see. Like they do it very well. And yeah, it's all relative. I'm probably comparing to other couples who don't do it so well. But again, I feel like even they would benefit from your book because they'll get the language. Like they'll communicate much easily in the future when she's saying, "Oh, I felt like I did the entire snow thing." At least they will have a contract in place that yeah, you were supposed to do it, so she won't have a grudge, which I think is a great thing to have.
Well, I appreciate that because that's right. Now, when I'm packing my kids for travel, I hold the packing for travel card. So I'm not sitting there grumbling and throwing their stuff into the bag and purposely forgetting something. So I have to buy something really expensive when I get there and show Seth that I'm spending $50 on a bathing suit. All these resentments that it takes off my plate now because I know what I'm responsible for. And I know what Seth's responsible for. And we check in every single night. And he doesn't say, oh, why am I here? The practice of us having 10 minutes a night to communicate is probably the most important thing in terms of the thousands of couples who give me data for who really feels empowered and alive in their relationships and people who still feel that sort of resentment. It's the communication that's so powerful.
Both of us love the idea of unicorn space, which is like the ultimate reward and the goal of the entire fair play system. I think both of us like want more and more of it. You explain in the book that some things like working out, beautification, and similar things are not part of unicorn space. So we were kind of discussing this and trying to understand more about what qualifies and what doesn't. And then we came to a point where we are like, does our podcast qualify as our unicorn space? And we need your help
Yes.
with that.
Yes, of course it does. The way I look at unicorn space, and I'm writing a whole second book about it now.
Oh, yay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's book two. It's really looking at a program, right? A program to sort of burn that guilt and shame and have a permission to be unavailable. But what I found in the most creative people. And so what I found was it was the active pursuits that are unicorn space. So I call it unicorn space, as you know, because like the mythical equine, right? It doesn't fucking exist
Yeah.
unless you're willing to reclaim it. And so that's why, it's not just sparkly and rainbows. It's this idea that it doesn't exist, right? Unicorns are not real. They are fake. They don't exist in our society or anywhere in on planet Earth. But we can sort of this idea of not even just finding. It's about and not manifesting. It's this idea of committing to the fact that you deserve uninterrupted time for things that you love. And
Right.
so the one thing I will say why it's so listening to a podcast, self-care. Eating pie, that's my self-care. It's emotional eating is how I got through the pandemic. Love it. Love pie tastings. That's self-care. Active pursuits with authentic goals. So your podcast is 1000% what I mean by unicorn space. It's an active pursuit.
Yay.
It's not easy. It's hard. You have to carve out time for it. It may be quote unquote unpaid. And so then people say, well, what are you doing this for? Like why are you wasting your time? I heard that for 9 years as I was writing my book. We get washes of waves that just crash into us that say, you don't deserve the permission to be unavailable from your roles if it's unpaid. So that's why to me, you have to do this podcast. It's your eudaimonia. It's your flow state. It doesn't mean it'll always be easy unicorn space. And so what I will say to people out there is what makes you you and how do you share that with the world? Because that the sharing with the world component became almost universal in the people who were telling me that they were thriving in their own unique time alone in their it's called the flow state, often what I call unicorn space. And that sharing is so powerful. It could be what you're doing, which is basically saying, look, we have a voice and our voice may not sound culturally like what you've heard in sort of the South Asian community, and that's okay. And we're going to challenge those norms. Whatever it is, it's incredibly valuable. And everybody deserves it, especially after children, which is when we often put ourselves last.
That's true. Yeah. I think that is why I have seen a lot of my friends when they have kids, they just lose, like you also talk about in the book, they just lose themselves somewhere. Like they let go of their hobbies that make them happy or excited, even if they're unpaid, right? So I think that idea of unicorn space was really amazing.
And
It's
can I say one thing? I think we know, for especially for women, you hear the word hobby or vanity project or passion project. Like, I want to burn all those things because
yeah.
they sound so nice to have or almost privileged to have. When I want to say that the active pursuits that make you you, uninterrupted attention for things that you love, is probably the most important thing
Right.
for your mental health.
Yeah.
And what you said, Eve, is so important and so prevalent. Like a lot of women, their pursuits are creative. That could just be how we have grown up. It could be a cultural thing, or it could just be a very general thing. But when women do any of this, it's like, oh, it's a hobby. And like, this is something you do in your free time. And then men, they make their boys clubs with other men and they are like, oh, we are discussing business ideas, and
Yep.
like nothing is coming
Yeah.
out of that, nothing at all. And at least I can say for my project, yeah, we, Kathy and I, are not making big bucks out of this, but at least I would like to say we are cash flow positive, right? How
Amazing.
Yeah.
can he
By
how
the way,
many
even if you
men?
weren't though, even if you weren't,
Yeah,
is still valuable. That
That's
is
yes.
true.
a that
And we
is a
never did this for money, so we don't
snap.
care.
Right,
But I
exactly.
wanna like tell those men who attach a power trip of money to everything. Like, how many of your business idea conversations are actually cash flow positive? Like, let's discuss that before you shame people's hobbies.
I'm giving you three snaps because I love that so much. And again, that is amazing. It is something to be proud of. And I also think that on top of it, like you said, the most important thing you said though was that you didn't start this to make money. And I think, especially with a quote unquote side hustle, if you've heard that too, it just, our culture is so obsessed with money and we get lost. And I talk about this in the book a lot. We get lost in intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And so what you see in the research is that it's often hard in midlife as we get older to separate the two. So when you're young, you're intrinsically motivated, right? And so I just want us all to come back to more of our intrinsic motivation. And the way I started to do that and write about it in Fair Play, but now translates over to book two, is this idea that really understanding and living your values is very, very important. Oftentimes we don't get to reflect on those values. A martyr, right? Maybe those are not values that serve us anymore. And so looking at some of the values that we've been given extrinsically versus intrinsically why are you motivated? And I'll ask you that question just for fun. So Jaman, what makes you intrinsically excited? Give me one value that you have that you want to share with the world.
I think I love to create,
Great.
and that's the basis of so many things that I do in my life. I want to create, and I have this creative energy that I want to put out.
I love that. What about you, Kati?
I think in whatever I do, I love to see some change in the world by what I'm doing. And that is what intrinsically motivates me. So, like a podcast, and then I'm working on my own ed tech startup. Even if I'm doing a full time job, I keep looking for things that have changed the world a little bit, like my actions that cause the world to change a little bit in a positive way. So that's what motivates me.
Yeah, I mean, I tear up even just hearing that. How often do we get to talk about, our values and what motivates us?
So
This conversation of values, one, it reminded me that nobody really talks about this in our real lives. The only time I actually heard this word used was in companies where they are like, oh, these are our five
yeah,
values, which is like innovation and like some version of it. So for the
Oh,
longest time, I thought these are the only values you can have. Like, and later I figured out, no, like you can have any value that resonates with you. But it's so confusing because no real person is talking about it. Only tech companies are talking about
that's
it.
right. And that's why I said that's
yeah,
why I confuse people when on the playground I'd say, so what are your values? Why values became the core of fair play. Because what I realized was that my life was not going to change by treating the cards, this metaphor, as a list. I just said to Seth, you have fucking garbage. It's yours, right? It wasn't working. It was when we took the step back to align on what we both cared about as a family so that he could have buy-in. Also, something you only hear in corporate speak, buy-in, right?
yeah,
But even more importantly, it was that I realized, like, I don't remember the vows I said on my wedding day, but what I remember so clearly was the values conversation we had over garbage. And that was when I realized that he was owning garbage, but we were still butting heads because I was a garbage stalker, right? I would sit, stare at him, say, okay, he said he would put the garbage liner back in and take it out. Or he knows what CPE means, conception, planning, execution, but why am I still so nervous that it's going to get done? And I realized I'd missed a very key step of what I do in my day job, in my mediation practice, which is force them to have these values conversations. And so that's why when people
yeah.
skip that step of fair play, they say, well, it's not working. I'm like, well, did you skip step 2? Because usually that's why it's not working. Yeah, well, we didn't really build our deck together. We just started to see who does what. I'm like, well, then it's not going to work. That's the key part of the fair play book, and now the book too, is that you tell your stories. But that's where the minimum standard of care idea came in. It's this idea in fair play that we can agree on a minimum standard of care if we're willing to have conversations. So yes, so Seth and I invested 20 minutes in talking about garbage. Guess what, folks? My garbage goes out every day. Before he goes to bed at night. Seth owns that task. And it was because I was willing to tell him my stories and he was able to tell me his stories. Tell your stories. Think about your values. What are the values that you've been given? What ones resonate? Which ones you do not need anymore?
I love this. You being so honest with us here and also raising this important point of values, which I think is definitely missing from our conversations. We don't talk to our friends about it, we don't talk about it at all. And I think it's so important in a partnership more than anything else.
And this is the first time we have talked about our values, actually.
Yeah,
So
we
thank
never
you
talked
for
about it.
initiating
Yeah.
that conversation, Eve.
Keep doing it. Keep doing it. And if you guys ever feel you're at a creative standstill with each other, right? Sometimes, but usually, it's often there's some sort of story or values that needs to be told. That's all. And it
Right.
becomes an easy way to break through.
Hmm. Yeah. So since we are a book podcast, one of the questions that we ask all our guests is what are the books that you're reading right now?
Oh my God, that's my favorite question. Well, I will say Well Behaved Indian Woman, right? That is one of
Oh,
my favorite
nice.
books. And I saw that, like I said, you interviewed my friend or the amazing author. I just finished Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. My friend just wrote something called The Prophets, which is an amazing book in the same imprint as my book for Black History Month. It is a book about queer slaves and what it was like to sort of live in that time period and have a same-sex relationship. It's a really, really beautiful book. And obviously it's bigger than that, but it's centered around that. Another book I just started to read is this amazing book of poetry called What Kind of Woman? And someone sent it to me because she said so much in it is so resonant with fair play. And she has poems called Marriage as Death, 1,000 Wives. I'll read you just one quick poem to end on. 1,000 Wives. The secret is my husband has many wives. One for bluebird mornings, one for doubt in the afternoon, one for the stretch of evening when the children perform their endless rituals. There is the business wife, the wanting wife, the wife who stands on the front porch and needs to talk to you. For a time, we have the good wife, the thin wife, eventually the dead wife, the ghost of every woman who tried to change for you.
Wow.
Pretty intense.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
So it's really beautiful.
Love that. And before we end our discussion today, is there something that you would like to say to our listeners?
Yes, I'm here to tell you that your time is diamonds. You may not even know what that means yet, but one day you will. If you are stuck in our traditional roles that often we end up in. And I'm also here to say that you deserve that permission to be unavailable. And the last thing I'll say is that if you have guilt and shame, do as my good friend, another book I love to read is Dr. Cheryl Gonzalez Ziegler's book. It's called Mommy Burnout. And she always says, when you feel guilt and shame, especially when you know really deep down you shouldn't, reframe it to say, I made that decision because. So now I say, I feel guilty because I didn't put Anna to bed. I'm not putting Anna to bed tonight. Instead, I say, I made that decision because I get to be on Brown Girls Read. I get to be with sharing myself with the world. I get to create. I get to change the world, right? I get to use my values in a way that's going to ultimately inspire my daughter. So it becomes so much more empowering if you think I feel guilty because to say I made that decision because, or I am making that decision because.
That's an amazing message. And I think everyone needs to hear
World
this.
anymore. I look at my world as my active choices. I have choice over how I use my time, and I get to act on that time choice. And to me, that is where that's my wish for your listeners. It's my wish for all women that we have equal time choice over how we use our days as men do.
Thank you, Eve. That's super empowering. And I hope more people can take your message forward.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Eve. And we really enjoyed discussing so many things with you, your favorite reads, your inspiration, your journey, our values as well. Like it has given us so much to think about. And you're such a powerhouse. We completely love talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.